Do you ever find yourself just falling asleep at something? Homework, perhaps. Ever want a bit of a challenge? Or do you ever just find your mind melting over something? Homework, perhaps. Ever want a bit of a break? Today, I'll show you how to switch modes between the straight up boring and the straight up impossible. To start, let's do exactly that. How to transition from something being too easy to making it a little harder. In a way, this is the easier one, which is kind of ironic. Making something harder is actually a bit easier. Anyway, the obvious way to do this is to simply enjoy it less. This tea doesn't taste that good. However, when I add a little bit of sugar, it'll taste better. Obviously, it'll be more challenging for me to drink the tea without the sugar, because it just won't be as nice. And even though I haven't stirred this, it's quite a nice brew. However, the common way of making something more difficult by enjoying it less is probably why people don't do it as often. In fact, people do not like things being harder because they think it's wrong and they will enjoy it less. This is not necessarily the case. And in this video, or this, or wherever, somewhere above me, I will explain to you why challenging yourself is actually a very beneficial thing to do on occasion. But to challenge yourself doesn't mean you have to enjoy yourself less. In fact, usually challenging yourself is to make you enjoy it more. So, let's go back to the original question. How do you make something which is downright boring a little harder and a little bit more fun? And the method I'll use to do this is the questing system, as you can see in the thumbnail, where basically you can change your goal or your quest in order to slightly change the process and enjoy it more. This first one will be adding a couple of side quests. Now, let's say I'm playing a video game. Maybe something like Breath of the Wild. I've got a poster over there. I love the game. Or, I don't know, Hollow Knight, and you're finding something a little bit too easy. You'll probably look for one of the in-game side quests, just to enjoy yourself a bit more. This has the same principle. Now, I went bouldering the other day, and I found a wall which I really liked. But unfortunately, it was way too easy for me. It was a V1. And so instead of doing it the intended way, I decided to try to do it without my feet. I climbed it with just my hands. And this is completely superficial. I got the same goal, but I enjoyed it more even though it was more challenging because it was a really interesting process and it was just fun. That's the way bouldering works. And so in everyday life, imagine you're doing a task, maybe something like homework, and you're finding it a bit too easy. Obviously this doesn't happen every day, but if it does, come to this video. Instead of doing it the intended way, you decide to do something radical. And instead, you decide not to use the calculator. You do all the long division and multiplication on your piece of paper. For someone who likes maths, you can enjoy that more. And the process applies similarly to different things. So let's say you have an English homework, maybe trying to write in your left hand for a little bit. Something I really want to learn is to be ambidextrous. Even if it's not learnable. I don't know, I'll probably make a video someday. And then there's the other way. The other way is to set up a new main quest. And this main quest is basically the way you might have thought initially after the make it less fun. It's just to try another path which makes it more difficult. Instead of doing the intended task which you want to do, you can do the challenging task instead, and that will perhaps make you enjoy it more. Or if you won't enjoy yourself more, time will pass quicker because you're not going to be as bored. In fact, sometimes taking an extremely difficult main quest is also really fun. When I boulder, I usually climb V4s and V5s, and so I tried this new V5-6, and I was pretty bad at it. So what I decided to do is I split it up into 3 parts, practice each of the parts, and this would be the same process for something else. Find a more challenging task, and literally just break it down into small steps, and do it. So now we've got the harder one, making something which is very difficult a bit easier. The reason I say this is a bit more difficult to achieve is simply because sometimes things are completely annoying and completely unavoidable. It's just the way things are. For example, some homeworks. It's just impossible to enjoy them. However, with some of the methods which I'll describe coming up, they should feel a little bit more tangible or enjoyable. So the first one is very similar to the one we described previously, and this is to create side quests. Or, more easily, break the main quest down into many side quests, or smaller quests. I briefly touched upon this in the previous one. However, it's even more useful when you have to do something really difficult. So what do? Again, with this bouldering wall taken as an example, you break it down to small steps. You break it all down, and then you practice these small bits, and you get used to it. If you watch my previous video, this is what Geometry Dash players also do. They will break down a level into multiple different start positions and practice the level from the start position to the end. So they'll get more and more consistent until eventually they can beat the level. You can basically apply the same thing in most of your daily practices or whatever you do. Just break it down into smaller steps and then maybe you'll enjoy it more. And then there is the final one, the radical one. The one which perhaps your boss doesn't want you to use. Or in fact, your teacher if you're watching this. And this one is to rephrase the main quest. Just as in making something easy harder, changing the main quest really does help. The reason I said this is radical, however, is because sometimes you can't quite do this, especially when the process is the end goal. But when you have a tangible end goal, imagine this V9 wall which I have, imagine you have that top hold as the end goal. If you notice next to it, there is a V1. And now I think you might be able to catch on. I will take the V1 route to get to the V9. And obviously you can't always do this. But if you do need to reach the same end goal, sometimes extracting yourself from the situation, looking at it with a broader spectrum, can really help you find it more enjoyable or easier. In fact, this is the method which I usually use when I find something really difficult and unavoidable. I take 5 minutes, I step back, I look at the problem through a new set of eyes and see if there's an easier way to do it. I really recommend it. To summarize, when you want to make something easy, harder, you can either add side quests to make it a little bit more challenging, or make the main quest even harder. However, if this main quest becomes too hard and you want to make it easier, break it down into small tangible steps, put it all together, and then complete it. And if anybody comments, "This guy really is an NPC giving out side quests like that," I will ban you from the channel. Have a good one, guys. That is sweet.